I flew 1,200 miles with a silver-wrapped box balanced on my knees, and before I could even sit down at my parents' 45th anniversary party, my mother looked at me and said, "We didn't invite you." Brianna handled this. 70 people heard her. The church ladies near the folding chairs, the neighbors from Maple Street, my cousins who used to sleep over in this same house every summer. Silver balloons brushed the ceiling. A slideshow of old wedding photos flickered against the wall. My father didn't hesitate. He glanced at the box in my hands, then at my sister standing beside the cake with a champagne glass, and he pushed my gift straight off the table. It hit the hardwood with a sharp crack. "She's the one who paid for this house," he said, nodding toward Brianna. The room went silent in that particular small town way where no one wants to breathe too loudly because they don't want to miss what happens next. I bent down slowly. I picked up the box. I smoothed the torn corner of the silver paper with my thumb. They didn't know what was inside it yet, and they definitely didn't know they'd be driving 15 hours through the night to my front door because of it. To understand how a silver-wrapped box could unravel my entire family, you have to go back 4.5 years to a Tuesday afternoon in Phoenix, Arizona, when my phone buzzed in the pocket of my scrubs while I was finishing up with a patient. My name is Elena Carter. I'm 34 years old. I'm a nurse practitioner at a busy family clinic where I spend my days diagnosing infections, adjusting blood pressure medications, and explaining test results in calm, steady tones. I grew up in Redfield, Missouri, population around 3,500. In Redfield, everyone knows who's behind on their lawn care and who hasn't shown up at church lately. Reputation isn't optional there, it's currency. My father, Thomas Carter, has always understood that. He's respected at church, the kind of man who shakes hands firmly and remembers everyone's name. My mother, Linda Carter, is gentle and careful with her words. My older sister, Brianna Carter, is everything that works in a town like ours. Confident, outgoing, always in the center of the room. At church barbecues, Dad would clap Brianna on the back and say, "That girl understands family." People would laugh and nod. Then he'd gesture toward me and add Elena's independent. Independent sounded like a compliment. It felt like distance. I was the quiet one. The one who brought home straight-A report cards and left them on the counter without ceremony. The one who cleaned up after potlucks while Brianna told stories at the table. No one ever said I wasn't loved. They just didn't say much at all. When I was 19, I packed 2 suitcases and left Missouri for Arizona to finish nursing school. I stood in the doorway that morning waiting for something from my father. Advice. Encouragement, a hug. He didn't look up from the television. Out there, he said, "You're on your own." I told myself that was freedom. For the first few years, I called home every Sunday at 7 p.m., without fail. Sometimes Mom answered. Sometimes it went to voicemail. Brianna usually texted updates instead. "They're busy. You know how Dad is. It's different since you left." Different slowly turned into distant. Holidays passed with shorter conversations, then missed ones. I kept telling myself that's what adulthood looks like. Kids move away, families adjust. 3 years after I moved to Phoenix, my phone buzzed again while I was charting between appointments. It was my Aunt Ruth, my mom's younger sister. She doesn't waste time. "Your parents are 4 months behind on the mortgage," she said. "The bank sent a foreclosure notice. If they don't catch up, they could lose the house by fall." I leaned against the counter in the supply room, staring at the beige wall like it might steady me. "How bad is it?" I asked. "Bad enough your dad isn't sleeping," she said. "Brianna told everyone she's going to handle it, but I haven't seen any payments." I ended the call and stood there with my heart pounding in my ears. The house on Maple Street wasn't just a building. It was my father's pride, my mother's garden, the hallway with the dent in the drywall from when Brianna and I fought over a curling iron in high school. In Redfield, losing your house isn't private. It's public. It becomes part of the town's story about you. That night I sat at my kitchen table in Phoenix and called the local bank in Redfield. I introduced myself as Elena Carter, daughter of Thomas and Linda Carter, and asked about the loan status. The woman on the line confirmed what Aunt Ruth had said. 4 months delinquent. Foreclosure process initiated. And someone called recently saying they'd take care of it, she added, but no payment came through. I knew exactly who that was. Brianna had made a promise. She just hadn't followed through. I stared at my laptop screen for a long time after hanging up. I could have called my parents. I could have confronted my sister. I could have exposed the gap between what was being said in Redfield and what was actually happening. Instead, I opened my banking app and did the math. $2,750 a month. After rent, after student loans, after groceries, it would be tight. It would mean extra shifts. It would mean putting off any dream of buying my own house, but it would stop the foreclosure. I called the bank back and asked about setting up automatic transfers from my account. There's one condition, I said. Do not tell my parents. Do not tell my sister. No one needs to know where the money is coming from. The woman hesitated, then agreed. When the first payment cleared, I was standing between exam rooms in the clinic hallway. My phone buzzed with the notification. $2,750 sent. I didn't feel heroic. I felt heavy. I told myself I wasn't doing it for credit. I wasn't doing it for praise. I was doing it so no one could ever say I abandoned my family. What I didn't understand yet was this. In a small town like Redfield, silence doesn't stay neutral. If you don't tell your story, someone louder will tell it for you. The 6th mortgage payment cleared on a Wednesday afternoon while I was washing my hands between patients. $2,750 transferred. I stood there staring at the water running over my fingers, thinking about how strange it was that something so quiet could hold up something so visible. In Redfield, Missouri, the Carter house still stood with its brown siding and chain-link fence, and no one driving past it had any idea that the reason it was still there was because I had rearranged my entire life around a monthly transfer. By the 2nd payment, the foreclosure notices stopped. By the 3rd, Aunt Ruth told me my father was sleeping again. He hasn't mentioned the bank in weeks, she said. He thinks things are turning around. Turning around. That's how it sounded from the outside. Like luck, like timing, like Brianna's promise had worked. Inside my 1-bedroom apartment in Phoenix, turning around looked like overtime shifts and canceled dinners. I picked up weekend coverage at the clinic. I swapped holiday rotations with coworkers who wanted time off. I stopped browsing real estate apps at night because I knew I couldn't afford to think about buying my own place anymore. Every month I watched the balance drop a little lower. Every month I told myself this was temporary. About 6 months in, Aunt Ruth called on a Sunday after church. You might want to know something, she said carefully. My stomach tightened. What at the potluck today? Brianna told a few of the ladies she's been helping your parents with the mortgage. Helping. I leaned against my kitchen counter, staring at the tile backsplash. Did Dad say anything, I asked? He nodded, she said. He looked proud. Proud. I pictured my father standing in the fellowship hall with his hands in his pockets, nodding at my sister, while women from the prayer group smiled approvingly. It wasn't a lie yet. Not technically. Brianna could say she was helping. She had made the promise after all. But a promise without payment is just air. A few months later, the language shifted. She told Mrs. Henley she's handling the mortgage, Aunt Ruth said during another call. Not helping, handling. Handling sounded final. Handling sounded like ownership. I felt something small and sharp settle in my chest. The 4th of July that year, I stayed in Phoenix. I told myself it was because of work. In truth, I didn't want to sit at a picnic table and watch a story unfold that erased me. That evening, fireworks popped in the distance outside my apartment while Aunt Ruth described what was happening back home. Your dad raised a glass, she said. He thanked Brianna for stepping up when family needed her. He said he's grateful she understands the value of keeping this house in the family. I sat at my kitchen table in the dim light, listening to the sound of fireworks through the open window. "Did Mom say anything?" I asked. "She clapped," Ruth said softly. She looked emotional. I pressed my hand flat against the table to steady myself. 3 months earlier, I had paid the balance that pulled them out of foreclosure. Now my sister was being toasted for it in front of neighbors and cousins. I could end it with one email, one attachment, one screenshot of my bank statement. But in Redfield, public embarrassment lingers. It stains. If I exposed Brianna at a picnic, my parents would be humiliated along with her. So I stayed quiet. Silence felt noble at first. Then it started to feel like complicity. The next escalation wasn't social, it was structural. "She's on their bank account now," Aunt Ruth said one morning. "Brianna. She convinced them it's easier if she manages things. Manages things. Joint checking, utility bills, insurance documents, mortgage correspondence." I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear. "Does Dad know?" I asked. "He thinks it's practical," Ruth said. "He trusts her." Of course he did. If Brianna controlled the mail and the phone calls from the bank, she controlled the information. She could answer questions before they ever reached my parents. She could shape the version of events they heard. A few weeks later, I received an automated notification from the bank about a routine servicing update. It was generic, but it was enough to make my pulse jump. I called the bank discreetly. "Has anyone inquired about refinancing?" I asked. There was a pause on the line. "There was a general inquiry about equity," the representative said. "No application submitted. Equity." The word echoed in my head long after I hung up. If the house gained equity and Brianna positioned herself as financial gatekeeper, she could steer future decisions. A line of credit, a refinance, something framed as smart planning. The house I was paying for could become leverage in a story I wasn't even in. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and the payment history pulled up on the screen. 12 months of transfers, each one identical, each one coming from my account in Phoenix. I started a folder on my desktop. Documentation. I downloaded statements, saved confirmations, labeled files with dates. It wasn't about confrontation yet, it was about protection. A few weeks later, I flew back to Redfield for a quick weekend visit. I told myself it was overdue, that showing up might rebalance something. At a local diner the next morning, the waitress refilled my coffee and smiled warmly. "Your sister's done so much for your folks," she said. "It's good they've got her." I smiled back. "Yeah," I said, "it's good they've got someone." Later that night at my parents' kitchen table, Dad mentioned how responsible Brianna had been lately. "She's kept everything organized," he said. "You know how important that is with a mortgage." He didn't look at me when he said it. Brianna sat across from me, legs crossed, smiling lightly. "You should come home more," she said. "It's easier when we're all involved." All involved. The irony almost made me laugh. Back in Phoenix, the 13th payment cleared, then the 14th. The balance dropped steadily. And with every transfer, I understood something more clearly. I thought I was protecting my family from losing their house. What I didn't see coming was that I might have to protect it from my own sister. By the time the 24th mortgage payment cleared, I had stopped thinking in months and started thinking in totals. I sat at my kitchen counter in Phoenix with my laptop open, staring at the amortization schedule. The balance was shrinking faster now. Every month I carved another piece off the debt tied to Maple Street. I had paid more toward my parents' house than I had saved for myself. That realization didn't feel bitter, it felt sobering. 2 years in the routine had settled into my bones. Extra shifts, careful budgeting, watching every automatic transfer leave my account like clockwork. The house in Redfield was safe, stable, secure, at least financially. Socially, something else was hardening. Aunt Ruth called one Sunday afternoon after a church leadership meeting. Brianna told everyone she rescued the house, she said. Rescued. That word landed differently than helped or handled. Rescued implied danger, heroism, a crisis solved by one decisive person. Dad didn't correct her, I asked. He repeated it, Ruth said quietly. He said he was proud she stepped up when things got tough. I leaned back against my couch and closed my eyes. Rescued suggested a story with a villain and a savior. In Redfield, I had quietly become the villain by absence. A few weeks later, Aunt Ruth mentioned something else. At the fundraiser for the church roof, she said someone joked that Brianna should inherit the house since she's the one paying for it. Inherit. That word echoed in my chest long after the call ended. Inheritance wasn't just about pride, it was positioning. If the town believed Brianna was financially responsible for the house, then any future decisions about it would naturally orbit around her. I imagined my father nodding along to that suggestion, thinking it made sense. Of course it would make sense. According to the narrative he'd been fed, I had left and rarely came back. Brianna had stayed and carried the weight. The truth was the opposite, and no one knew. The next escalation came from Aunt Ruth again. She met with a financial advisor, Ruth said one evening. Brianna said she wanted to discuss long-term property planning for your parents. Property planning. My stomach tightened. If Brianna could frame herself as the responsible daughter managing assets, then when my parents aged, she would already be the default decision-maker. It wouldn't even look suspicious. It would look practical. She told someone at the diner that you're not really involved anymore, Ruth added carefully. Not really involved. I stared at the wall in my living room, feeling something shift inside me. This wasn't just about reputation. It was about erasure becoming administrative. That night, I opened my laptop and drafted an email to my parents. I attached 2 years of bank statements. I wrote in calm, clear sentences, "It's me. I've been making the mortgage payments." I stared at the cursor blinking at the end of the paragraph. If I sent it, the illusion would shatter immediately. My parents would know. Brianna would know. The town would know soon after. But what if they chose her version anyway? What if I exposed everything and my father still said you left? The fear of that possibility sat heavy in my throat. Instead of hitting send, I created a new folder on my desktop. Documentation. I saved every statement, every confirmation, every email from the bank. I labeled them by month and year. I backed them up to a secure drive. It felt less like an emotional act and more like a legal one. Weeks passed. At a diner in Redfield, 2 women questioned how Brianna could afford large mortgage payments while also taking frequent weekend trips to St. Louis. The math doesn't add up, one of them said, according to Aunt Ruth. The doubt was small, quiet, but it existed. In a town of 3,500 people, doubt moves slowly but persistently. Not everyone clapped as enthusiastically at the next church luncheon when my father mentioned Brianna's responsibility. The applause sounded thinner, not gone, just thinner. Then I received another automated alert from the bank. A general inquiry regarding equity. Again. I called immediately. No application has been submitted, the representative assured me. Just informational. Informational. That meant someone was asking questions, exploring options, testing the boundaries. I hung up and sat at my desk for a long time. The mortgage balance was dropping steadily. Equity was increasing. The house was becoming more valuable on paper. If Brianna ever pushed for a refinance or line of credit under the guise of helping our parents, she would be building on the foundation I had quietly laid. For the first time, I didn't just feel hurt. I felt threatened, not financially, strategically. I called the bank's compliance department directly the next day. I requested an official payment history certification. I asked them to flag the account so that no structural changes could occur without direct borrower presence and confirmation. The tone of my voice was different this time. Not tentative, not apologetic, authoritative. I wasn't just protecting my parents from foreclosure anymore. I was protecting the truth from being repurposed. That evening, my boyfriend found me at the kitchen table surrounded by printed statements. "You look like you're building a case," he said gently. "In a way," I replied. He sat across from me. "Are you going to tell them?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. Why I thought about that for a long moment. Because once I say it, I said quietly, I can't control what they do with it. Silence had started as sacrifice. Now it was strategy. The mortgage balance dipped under a number that felt symbolic. Less than half of what it had been when I started. 2 years in. More than $100,000 already sent. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. The house was safer than it had ever been, but the story attached to it was growing more dangerous by the day. The closer the mortgage got to zero, the more valuable the lie became. And I was beginning to understand that at some point the truth would have to stand in a room full of people and speak for itself. By the time the mortgage crossed the halfway mark, the payments didn't feel temporary anymore. They felt like a second life. 3 years in, I could recite the loan balance from memory. I checked it between patients in the grocery store line, sometimes in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep. Each transfer landed exactly the same way, steady and predictable like a pulse. $2,750. Gone. The house in Redfield stood firm. No more late notices. No more rumors about foreclosure. My parents hosted holiday dinners without fear. They just didn't host me. Thanksgiving that year came and went with a text from Brianna. Dad thinks it might be awkward if you come. It's been a while. Awkward. As if I were the one who'd created the distance. On Christmas morning, I woke up in Phoenix to a tagged photo on Facebook. My parents by the tree, Brianna beside them, cousins smiling. The caption read, "So grateful for family." There was no direct message, no call, not even a missed one. Easter passed in silence. Through Aunt Ruth, I learned the house was full every holiday. Neighbors bringing pies, church friends stopping by, my father carving turkey at the same dining table I had grown up eating at. Brianna told relatives I had chosen distance. Chosen. That word spread easily. In Redfield, chosen distance sounded like disloyalty. Meanwhile, the equity in the house was growing. With every payment, the balance dropped and the property value climbed. Equity changes incentives. It makes a house more than shelter. It makes it an asset. Aunt Ruth mentioned one afternoon that Brianna had been asking about property taxes and recent sales in the neighborhood. She said it's just smart planning, Ruth told me. Smart planning. I knew that phrase. A week later, Ruth overheard Brianna say something that stopped me cold. When the house is fully ours, we'll restructure things. Fully ours, not mom and dad's. Ours. I repeated those words to myself that night in my apartment, letting them settle in my chest. The mortgage was in my parents' names. The payments were coming from me. But the narrative had shifted so completely that Brianna was speaking as if she had ownership in waiting. I flew home for a brief weekend visit that spring. I didn't announce it widely, just told my parents I'd be in town. Dinner that night was polite, familiar, careful. Dad mentioned casually how responsible Brianna had been. She's kept everything organized, he said. You know how important that is when you're managing a mortgage? Managing. I sat at the table, hands folded in my lap. Yes, I said evenly. It is. My mother's eyes flicked toward me for a split second, then away. She didn't correct him. She didn't question the statement. Brianna smiled at me across the table. You should visit more, she said softly. It helps when everyone's involved. Everyone. I wondered what involvement looked like in her version of events. The next morning at a diner downtown, the waitress topped off my coffee and said warmly, Your sister's done so much for your folks. They're lucky to have her. Lucky. I smiled and nodded. Back in Phoenix, I sat on my kitchen floor one evening with my laptop open, the payment history glowing in the dim light. I calculated the total I had sent so far. Over $100,000. For a moment, I considered stopping, letting 1 month lapse, forcing the account into tension again, forcing the truth to surface under pressure. The thought lingered longer than I expected, but the house still belonged to my parents, not to the lie. If I stopped paying, they would be the ones to suffer first. I closed the banking app and rested my head against the cabinet behind me. I wasn't paying for their approval anymore. I was paying for my integrity. The next day, I called the bank and requested updated official documentation, full payment ledger, certification available upon final payoff. "You've been very consistent," the loan officer said. Consistent. The word felt like something solid I could stand on. I printed copies of the statements and placed them in a folder. I saved digital backups in multiple places. For when it matters, that phrase echoed in my mind. Time kept moving. 4 years, then 4.5. The balance dipped under $10,000. Each month felt like a countdown now. Then one evening, scrolling through Facebook after a long shift, I saw it. Brianna's public post, celebrating 45 years of marriage for mom and dad, family only, silver decorations in the preview photo, comments flooding in, neighbors tagging each other, cousins promising desserts, family only. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. No message from my parents, no call, just a public announcement that defined who belonged. I set my phone down on the kitchen table and let the silence stretch around me. The mortgage was almost gone. The house would soon be fully paid. And my sister was organizing a celebration built on a story that erased me entirely. For years, I had convinced myself that staying quiet was the mature choice, the loving choice, the strong choice. Now I wasn't so sure, because once the mortgage hit zero, the lie would no longer be about survival. It would be about ownership. And if I didn't step into that room, silver balloons and all the narrative would be complete without me. The house was nearly free, but I was still invisible, and I was starting to realize that those two things could not continue at the same time. The final mortgage payment cleared on a Monday afternoon while I was sitting in my car outside the clinic. $2,750, loan paid in full. I stared at the notification on my phone longer than I expected to. 4.5 years, 54 consecutive payments, more than $148,000 sent from my account in Phoenix to a bank in Redfield, Missouri. The house on Maple Street was officially free and clear. I had imagined this moment dozens of times. I thought I would feel relief, pride, vindication. Instead, I felt exposed. For years, the mortgage had been the reason for my silence. It was still in progress, still fragile, still something that required protection. Now there was nothing left to protect. The debt was gone. Only the lie remained. That evening, I called a bank in Redfield. "I need the official mortgage satisfaction certificate," I said, "and a complete payment history covering the full term." The woman on the line congratulated me. "You've done something extraordinary," she said. I let that sentence hang between us. She didn't know my parents had no idea. A week later, a thick envelope arrived at my apartment in Phoenix. The bank's seal printed in blue across the corner. Inside was the certificate stating the property had been paid in full. Beneath it, page after page of transaction records. 54 months. My name listed again and again. I spread the documents across my kitchen table and read every line. It felt surreal seeing my own sacrifice reduced to paper. Numbers, dates, official stamps, proof. 2 weeks after the final payment, I was scrolling through Facebook after a late shift when I saw Brianna's post. Celebrating 45 years of marriage for mom and dad, family only. Silver decorations in the preview photo. A cake with metallic accents. Dozens of comments. "So proud of you, Brianna. You're such a blessing to your parents. The best daughter." There was no direct message to me, no private call, just a public definition of who counted as family. I stared at the words family only until my jaw tightened. If I said nothing, the narrative would seal itself permanently. Brianna as the devoted daughter who kept the house. Me as the one who left and drifted. I picked up my phone and called her. She answered on the third ring. "Elena," she said, her tone smooth and surprised in a way that wasn't convincing. "I saw the post," I said. "When should I book my flight?" There was a pause, just long enough. "Dad doesn't think it's a good idea," she replied. "It might be awkward." Awkward. Did he say that I asked calmly, or are you deciding for him? Another pause. Longer this time. I'm just trying to keep things peaceful, she said. You haven't really been around. I let that settle between us. I'll be there, I said. You're making this harder than it needs to be, she replied. No, I said quietly. I'm not. I hung up before she could respond. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the mortgage documents spread out in front of me. I had options. I could mail the papers to my parents quietly, let them discover the truth in private, avoid public confrontation. I could post everything online, upload screenshots, let Redfield connect the dots on its own. Or I could show up, not to argue, not to beg, not to humiliate, to place the truth in the middle of the room and let it speak. For 4.5 years, I had protected my parents from embarrassment. I had swallowed every moment of public praise aimed at Brianna because I didn't want to fracture their standing in a small town that thrives on perception. But the lie wasn't protecting them anymore. It was reshaping them. I drove to a craft store after work the next day. I bought a sturdy box, silver wrapping paper. The color matched the theme in Brianna's announcement. It also matched the ribbon in my parents' wedding photos from 45 years ago. I remembered my mother once telling me she kept one of those ribbons in her jewelry box for decades. Silver had been their color, now it would carry something else. At home, I placed the mortgage satisfaction certificate at the bottom of the box. On top of it, the full payment ledger. I clipped the pages neatly. No highlighting, no dramatic notes. Then I wrote a letter. Not angry, not bitter. I wrote that I never stopped loving them, that I left Missouri to build a life strong enough to stand on its own, that the house was always theirs. I just made sure no bank could take it. I didn't mention Brianna once. The documents would handle that part. I folded the letter carefully and set it on top of the stack. When I sealed the box, my hands were steady. I booked a flight from Phoenix to Missouri for the morning of the anniversary. 1,200 miles. I didn't tell my parents I was coming. I didn't tell Brianna again. The only person who knew was Aunt Ruth. You sure you're ready? She asked over the phone. I'm not going to fight, I said. I'm just not going to disappear. The night before my flight, I placed the silver-wrapped box on my kitchen counter and stood there looking at it. 4.5 years of silence fit inside that space. 4.5 years of monthly transfers. 4.5 years of letting someone else take credit for the roof over my parents' heads. I picked up the box and felt its weight. It wasn't heavy, but it carried everything. I wasn't flying home to win an argument. I was flying home to stop being written out of my own family's story. I parked at the end of Maple Street and sat there with the silver-wrapped box resting on my lap while music drifted faintly through the open windows of my parents' house. Silver balloons were tied to the mailbox. Cars lined both sides of the road. Through the front window, I could see people moving around in clusters, drinks in hand, the glow of a slideshow flickering against the wall. 70 guests at least, none of them expecting me. For a moment, I let the engine idle. My reflection stared back at me from the windshield. 4.5 years of quiet decisions had led to this driveway. I picked up the box, stepped out of the rental car, and walked toward the front door. The house looked smaller than I remembered. When I pushed the door open, the smell of catered food and familiar furniture wrapped around me. Folding chairs from the church lined the living room walls. A long table ran down the center covered in silver runners and glass vases. A slideshow of wedding photos looped on a laptop in the corner. My parents at 20 smiling beneath silver streamers. I appeared in only a handful of later pictures. Heads turned, conversations thinned. Someone near the kitchen whispered my name too loudly. I scanned the room and found them. My father at the head of the table, one hand resting on the back of a chair. My mother seated beside him. Brianna standing near the cake champagne glass raised mid-toast. She saw me first. Her smile flickered for half a second before settling back into place. And I'm just grateful I could step up when things got hard, she was saying, especially when it came to protecting this house. Applause followed. My father nodded, pride clear in his expression. I stepped forward, My mother's eyes met mine. "We didn't invite you," she said, her voice carrying farther than she probably intended. Brianna handled this. The room went quiet in a way that felt deliberate. I didn't answer immediately. My father looked at the silver-wrapped box in my hands. Before I could say a word, he reached forward and shoved it off the table. It slid across the silver runner and hit the hardwood floor with a crack that echoed louder than it should have. "She's the one who paid for this house," he said, nodding toward Brianna. "She's the one who's been here." The air felt heavy. No one moved. No one spoke. I bent down slowly and picked up the box. The corner of the silver paper had torn slightly. I smoothed it with my thumb, pressing the crease flat. I stood up straight and looked at my father. "I didn't come to argue," I said evenly. "I came because I'm your daughter." He didn't respond. "I won't stand here and be humiliated for loving you," I continued. Brianna stepped closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "You're making a scene," she whispered. "You shouldn't have come." I met her eyes. "I'm not the one who made this a scene." I placed the box back on the table, not near Brianna, directly in front of my father. "If you believe she paid for this house," I said calmly, "open it." A ripple passed through the room. Someone near the back shifted in their seat. A fork clinked against a plate. My father stared at the box but didn't reach for it. Brianna crossed her arms. "You don't have to entertain this," she said loudly. "She hasn't been around, this is just guilt." Guilt? The word almost made me laugh. "I'm not asking you to entertain anything I said. I'm asking you to look." My mother's hands trembled in her lap. "Elena," she said softly, "this isn't the time." "There hasn't been a time," I replied. The silence stretched. No one defended me. No one corrected my father. No one questioned Brianna. They just watched. I realized then that staying wouldn't change the dynamic. Not tonight. Not in this room. I had already done what I came to do. The truth was sitting in front of them. I didn't need to argue it into existence. I turned toward the door. "Elena," my mother called weakly. I paused but didn't look back. For 4.5 years, I had protected their house from foreclosure. I had protected their reputation from public embarrassment. I had protected my sister from exposure. I wasn't protecting anyone anymore. I walked past the folding chairs, past the slideshow of silver-themed memories, past neighbors who suddenly found their shoes fascinating. The screen door creaked as I pushed it open. Cool evening air hit my face. Behind me, I heard raised voices, a sharper tone in Brianna's voice. My father saying something I couldn't make out, but I didn't stop. I reached my car and opened the driver's side door. Before I could sit down, my phone vibrated in my hand. "Dad." I let it ring. It stopped. Then Mom. I let that ring too. The house behind me buzzed with energy I couldn't see but could feel. I sat in the driver's seat and closed the door. For years I had swallowed humiliation in small private moments. Tonight it had happened in front of 70 people, and still I felt steadier than I ever had, because for the first time I wasn't begging to be included. I had placed the truth in the center of the room and stepped aside. If they wanted to keep clapping for the wrong daughter, they could. But the proof was waiting, and paper doesn't stay silent forever. I had barely turned onto the main road out of Redfield when my phone started lighting up. "Dad." I let it ring. "Mom." I let that ring too. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, but my pulse was loud in my ears. I wasn't trying to punish them. I just wasn't ready to hear whatever version of the story they had constructed in the last 5 minutes. Then Aunt Ruth's name flashed across the screen. I answered. "Elena," she said, her voice tight but controlled. "Don't hang up." "I'm not," I replied. There was noise in the background. Chairs scraping. Voices layered over each other. "What happened?" I asked. "You left," she said. And the room tried to pretend nothing had happened. I could picture it. Brianna clapping her hands lightly, telling everyone to enjoy the cake. Dad clearing his throat. Mom dabbing at her eyes. "Brianna said not to let you ruin the night," Ruth continued. "She told everyone to sit down." And I asked. And no one moved. I pulled over onto the shoulder of the road, gravel crunching beneath the tires. Your father was staring at the box, Ruth said. Just staring at it. I closed my eyes for a second. What did he do? I asked. Before he opened it, I asked Brianna a question, Ruth said. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. I asked her which bank she used for the mortgage, she continued. Since she paid it. I almost smiled despite the tension coiled in my chest. And I pressed. She named the bank, Ruth said. Confident. Like she'd rehearsed it. Of course she had. And then I told her we should see what you brought. There was a pause on the line as if Ruth were choosing her words carefully. Your father unwrapped the silver paper, she said. I could hear it in my head. The sound of tearing paper, the room holding its breath. He pulled out the first document, Ruth continued. The mortgage satisfaction certificate. My heart thudded once hard. I read it, she said, out loud. Silence filled the space between us. What did you say? I asked quietly. I read the part that says the property is paid in full, she replied. Then I read the total amount. Then I read your name, Elena Marie Carter. The words must have sounded different in that room than they ever had before. No one said anything, Ruth said. It was like the air had been sucked out. I imagined my father's face, the way his jaw tightens when he's processing something he doesn't want to accept. Brianna tried to say she contributed in other ways, Ruth went on. But I had the payment ledger in my hand, page after page, month after month, 54 payments, she said, all from your account, not one from hers. The gravel beneath my tires shifted slightly as a car passed behind me. What did Dad say? I asked. He didn't say anything at first, Ruth replied. He just sat down. I pictured him lowering himself into a folding chair, shoulders heavy, pride cracking quietly. And then she continued. I mentioned the equity inquiries. My breath caught. You what? I told them there were inquiries about refinancing, she said evenly. That those inquiries were made under Brianna's name. The silence on the other end of the line felt thicker now. Someone from church asked if she was planning to leverage the house, Ruth added. Brianna didn't answer. I leaned back in my seat. She left, Ruth said after a moment. Through the back door, no dramatic confrontation, no screaming, just absence. What about Mom? I asked. She cried, Ruth said simply. Not polite tears, real ones. I swallowed hard, and Dad, I pressed. He picked up his phone, she said. He started calling you immediately. I glanced down at the missed calls stacked on my screen. He looked like a man who realized he'd been clapping for the wrong person, Ruth said softly. The image hit deeper than any accusation could have. People started leaving early, she continued. No one touched the cake. Silver decorations, untouched dessert, 70 witnesses. In a town like this, Ruth said, it doesn't take long. I knew what she meant. By morning, the story would have traveled from the church parking lot to the diner counter to the grocery store checkout line. Dad told the bank he wants Brianna removed from the accounts, Ruth added. He's going in first thing tomorrow. I exhaled slowly. Are they angry? I asked. At themselves, she said. Mostly. The words settled somewhere deep. I didn't open the box to humiliate them, I said quietly. I know, Ruth replied. That's why it worked. I sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun dip lower over the fields. Are you coming back? She asked. Not tonight, I said. My phone buzzed again. Dad. I let it ring. I wasn't ready to hear an apology born out of shock. I needed it to be born out of understanding. Drive safe, Ruth said before hanging up. The whole town knows now. I started the engine and pulled back onto the road. Behind me, Maple Street was quieting down. The applause had evaporated. The narrative had flipped. For 4.5 years, my sister had stood in rooms collecting gratitude that wasn't hers. Tonight, the gratitude dissolved into silence. And for the first time in years, I wasn't the one standing outside the story. They were. And the truth was sitting on their silver-covered table, stamped and signed, refusing to be ignored. I was sitting on my back patio in Phoenix the next morning when I heard a truck engine slow down in front of my house. The desert air was cool just before sunrise. My coffee was still steaming in my hand. I hadn't slept much. My phone lay face down on the small metal table beside me, buzzing occasionally through the night with missed calls I hadn't returned. The engine cut off. I knew that sound. Missouri plates on a dusty pickup didn't belong on my quiet street. I stood slowly and walked to the edge of the patio. My father stepped out first. He looked older than he had the night before. Shoulders slightly rounded, eyes rimmed red. My mother climbed out from the passenger side holding the silver-wrapped box against her chest. They had driven 15 hours straight. No text, no warning, just a decision. For a moment, none of us moved. There were maybe 20 feet between us, but it felt like years. My father swallowed hard. "I was wrong," he said. No excuses, no explanation, just that. The words hung in the morning air like something fragile. My mother's voice broke next. "I let it happen," she said. "I let her speak for us. I let you be pushed aside." I felt something shift in my chest, but I didn't rush forward. Steady is power. They walked up the driveway slowly, like they were unsure if they were allowed. "Can we come in?" my father asked. I stepped aside and held the door open. My house in Phoenix isn't large, it's modest, clean, built on overtime shifts and careful budgeting. There are no heirlooms on the walls, no silver-themed decorations, just photographs from hiking trips and framed certificates from years of school. Dad noticed everything. He took in the small living room, the worn but comfortable couch, the kitchen table that seats 4. "You did all this yourself," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied. We sat at the kitchen table. The silver box rested between us. My father ran a hand over his face. "I should have asked questions," he said. "I should have picked up the phone. I should have looked. You should have listened," I said calmly. He nodded. "I trusted the loudest voice in the room," he admitted, "and I forgot that quiet doesn't mean absent." My mother's fingers trembled slightly as she placed the box in front of me. "I rewrapped it," she said softly. "I didn't want it to stay torn." That detail broke something open inside me more than the apology had. "I didn't do it to embarrass you," I said. "I know," my father replied. "That's why it hurts." Silence filled the space between us, but it wasn't the same silence from Redfield. This one felt honest. "I need something if we're gonna fix this," I said finally. My father straightened slightly. "Tell me," he said. "You call me," I said. "Not when there's a crisis, not when something explodes. Just because you want to." He nodded immediately. "No one speaks for me again," I continued. "If you want to know how I feel, you ask me. Not Brianna, not anyone else." Another nod. "And if there are financial decisions about that house, I'm told directly. No more filters." "I understand," he said. I looked at my mother. "I won't fight you about Brianna," I added, "but I won't be a race to keep the peace." Tears slid down her cheeks. "We don't want peace if it costs you," she whispered. My father's voice softened. "Can you forgive me?" he asked. "I'm willing to try," I said honestly. "But forgiveness isn't forgetting." He accepted that without argument. They stayed for a few hours. We drank coffee. We talked about practical things, the bank, removing Brianna from the joint accounts, consulting an attorney about any changes she may have initiated. There were no dramatic hugs, no movie moment, just 3 adults sitting at a kitchen table rebuilding something carefully. 3 months later, my phone rang at exactly 7 p.m. on a Sunday. "Dad," I answered. We talked about the weather, about a neighbor's new fence, about nothing important and everything important. He has called every Sunday since. My mother sends handwritten cards now, short notes, simple updates, real effort. They flew to Phoenix for Christmas. My father gripped the armrest during takeoff like the plane might argue with him. We ate dinner at my small table. No one mentioned the empty chair where Brianna might have sat. I didn't cut my sister off. I stopped chasing her. If she wants to repair anything, she can walk through my door without rewriting history. In Redfield, the story shifted quickly. Small towns have sharp memories when facts are stamped and notarized. Invitations to church committees stopped coming as often for her. Conversations quieted when she entered rooms. I don't celebrate that. I just don't correct it. What I learned isn't that money fixes family. It doesn't. I didn't win my parents back with a mortgage. I won something else, my voice. For 4.5 years, I thought silence was strength, and sometimes it is. But silence without boundaries becomes permission. If I had stayed home that night, silver balloons and all the lie would have solidified into legacy. Instead, I placed the truth on the table and stepped away. If you were in my place, would you have told the truth sooner? Or would you have waited until you had proof no one could twist? Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? What did you do about it? I read your stories because they matter. Because so many of us carry things quietly for years before we decide we're done disappearing. If this story meant something to you, stay with me. Subscribe. There are more stories about people who refuse to let someone else narrate their lives. Being quiet doesn't make you weak. Sometimes it just means you're waiting for the right moment to speak.